Welcome to the Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast, your go-to resource for navigating the world of entrepreneurship.
In today's episode, we're diving deep into essential entrepreneurship terms that form the backbone of any successful startup journey. Grasping these terms isn't merely about mastering the vernacular of the business world. It's about equipping yourself with the knowledge to navigate the complexities of entrepreneurship, make informed decisions, and strategically steer your venture towards success.
The Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast is your ultimate launchpad for igniting ideas and skyrocketing your entrepreneurial dreams. Tune in, buckle up, and let's unleash the entrepreneurial spirit within. Your two hosts will be Professor Gary Palin and serial entrepreneur Ryan Budden.
Hello, Ryan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. What about you, Professor Palin?
It's a busy day. I understand you had quite a day also.
I have been running around like a chicken with my head cut off already.
Look at that. So when you consult and you know what you're talking about, that makes you in demand.
Yeah, yes, particularly so right now, which is a fun feeling.
Well, the solution is raise your rates.
I have heard that. Now is the time when I'm feeling like that's what I should do, but I'm working with some really amazing clients at the moment. It's really fun.
Oh, that's awesome. Ryan, we have covered the past two episodes. We've been talking about terminology specific to entrepreneurship. The first episode, we covered finance terms. The second episode, we covered marketing terms. This last third episode, we're going to talk just about general terms. How's that sound like for game plan?
Sounds great. Let's get into it.
The first one is lean startup. Lean startup is a methodology for developing a business and products that aim to shorten the product development cycles. I believe it was first developed by Eric Ries in the book Lean Startup, which I would recommend. It's what you would think of the word lean, operating lean and mean, doing things with a very minimal component while still driving the business.
You are right. The term was coined in that book, and it is a really great book.
The lean startup is something I encourage not just first-time entrepreneurs, but I would say even very savvy entrepreneurs. Look at the lean method. It's a very simple way to drive the concept to see if you can validate the business and moving forward without throwing a lot of capital and time involved.
And a lot of people have expanded upon that lean concept. We're big advocates of the business model canvas. There's even a lean startup business model canvas that has adapted that to account for the principles that book talks about.
Very often with the lean startup, not only can you determine what is the optimal means to move a business forward, but it helps you decide, should you move that business forward or should you go to another project?
That's exactly right.
The second term follows along with that thought process is minimum viable product, or referred to as MVP. We use the term MVP very often. We're very embedded in that. Basically, you're looking at a product with the highest return on investment versus risk. Can I develop a product with minimal cost, expose the market to it, get feedback, further develop the product, expose the market to it, and get further development instead of developing the perfect product and find out it wasn't the perfect product?
Right. And that's the minimum viable part. So what is the smallest amount of the product that's going to actually work so that you can get that feedback? This is particularly important in technology development, where oftentimes there's an iterative approach, so the product continues to grow over its life cycle. So getting something out there, testing the market, seeing what people are liking, seeing what they're just not using is huge and can save a lot of time and money.
There's an old axiom is when you have built the business, when you look back in retrospect, if you're not embarrassed by the first product you launched, you waited too long to launch it.
That's probably really accurate, actually.
Steve Blank has done some very interesting work in writings on minimum viable product. That's another direction we could encourage our listeners to pursue some of the writings of Steve Blank. The third term is intellectual property, more commonly referred to as IP. That's the legal rights that result from intellectual activity in industrial, scientific, literary, and/or artistic fields. Who owns that intellectual property is so important in a business.
It is. I spend a lot of time in my consultancy talking about intellectual property, the intangible things that you can actually own. things like patents and trademarks and websites and all that stuff filters into it. But just being aware of what you can own and where some defensive plays need to happen can really impact a business long term.
Yes, and if you want to get your attorney excited, tell them you haven't protected your IP.
Yeah, there we go. You'll at least be ready for a long conversation if you tell your attorney that.
Yes, you'll have to wait for them to get up off the floor. Now, another common term, again, we use it very often, and we're big advocates of that, is the concept of pivot. Basically, a pivot is a structured course correction, and it's designed to test a new fundamental hypothesis about a product strategy and engine for the growth of the business.
It goes along with the MVP term. Once you test something, do you have to change directions, change what you were originally thinking, or are you headed in the correct course?
When I think of this too, I don't think I've ever been involved in a business where day one from the idea creation, where I thought the business would end up, where the market was, who the consumers were. And as I move forward, I've never been involved with one where that's where I ended up. Because what happened is as I got closer to the market, spoke more with the people in the industry, the customers, even competitors, I found out I need to pivot a little bit in this direction because there is a stronger sweet spot that I didn't see originally. Henceforth, the pivot.
My original exposure to the word pivot was through the analogy of a mountain climber. So you're at the bottom of a mountain. Obviously, your goal is to get to the top. At first, everyone's going to proceed in the most direct route, right? From where you're standing to the top. But oftentimes, as you get to different levels of the mountain, you realize it's necessary to turn right, to turn left, to go back down and do a U shape up the mountain, but get there in a different way. The goal is to deliver this eventual product to the market, which is the mountaintop. But how you get there might be very different from the original direction you started off in.
Yeah, so basically, driving a business is very rarely a straight line.
Very rarely.
For those who aspire to go higher in their entrepreneurial journey, we've got something just for you. Coming up next.
Are you ready to unlock your entrepreneurial potential? Introducing the Janus Entrepreneurial Report, your personalized roadmap to success. In just minutes, discover your unique strengths and areas for growth. Whether you're a seasoned business pro or just starting out, the Janus Entrepreneurial Report will help you identify and leverage your entrepreneurial tendencies. Don't wait, visit Prospirit.com and start your journey to success today.
Now, let's dive back into our journey of entrepreneurial insights.
The next term is a concept called scaling. And those are businesses both you and I are interested in. And those are always some of our first questions. What's the potential scalability? And that's the process of expanding a business model that's capable of supporting increased market demands. How large can this business become?
Yeah, very little to do with fish scales, more to do with how much can it grow.
And to me, that's a big difference between the concept of starting a small business versus starting a business that has the potential to be a very large business.
Right. And it's also a big difference, we've talked about this a few times in the podcast, between creating a job for yourself and creating an actual business entity.
That's correct. And I'm always very careful not to disparage small business because I encourage that. But to understand what you're trying to do is very important. Are you trying to, as you just said, create a small business to create a job for yourself and usually a job for several other people? Or are you trying to create an entity that stands alone that ultimately doesn't need you, that can scale to a large direction?
Neither one is the wrong answer. It's just what's best for you in your situation.
That's correct. And if you're scaling, that leads to the next term, which is exit strategy. And that's the planned approach to exiting or leaving the business. Whereas if you're trying to create a job for yourself, you're thinking, well, I'm never going to leave the business because this is my job. But if you're looking to drive a scalable venture, that is the plan from day one, is I'm going to ultimately leave the job. And typically it becomes self-sustaining and you're developing other people to run it and you're still involved, or you're selling it in some capacity.
The exit strategy is that, how do you leave? Sell the business, IPO it, so initial public offering. But what is the end of that course for you? And knowing that is the mountaintop, the analogy we just gave. Once you know where you're going, you can then plan your path there more effectively.
I encourage individuals when they're starting a business to always develop an exit strategy before they start.
That's really vital to successful businesses. You have to know where you're trying to go.
If they're pitching to an investor, they don't want to say our exit strategy is to ultimately be acquired. That's too vague. You want to say we can be acquired in this particular arena. Here are several potential companies that could acquire us. Here's the reasons they might be interested in acquiring us. You want to be more specific with your exit strategy.
Right. And hopefully what dollar value would you be acquired at?
Yes. If you're talking about an investor, they are definitely looking at an exit strategy.
That's right.
And very often what can cause a successful exit strategy would be because of our next term is disruptive technology. That's an innovation that significantly alters the way a business operates. Not necessarily just the individual business, but the entirety of the industry, something that shakes up that industry. And right now we're seeing AI, artificial intelligence, as a disruptive technology.
Big time. In my lifetime, it has to be the biggest disruptive technology that's come out.
We've talked in previous episodes where I talked about just the development of internet. That was a disruptive technology. In major shakeups, very often people think of disruptive technology, they're thinking computers. But when you think about it, the Gutenberg press was a disruptive technology.
Yeah. The first ability to mass produce documents.
And even closer to our time now, Henry Ford creating the automobile and then the assembly line associated with that was disruptive technology. The telephone was a disruptive technology. There will always be disruptive technologies around the corner. You want to understand where they are. If you can be one of the first to seize a disruptive technology in your industry, you can create a gazelle, have scaled dramatically, and have a very successful exit, to use the terms we have just used previously, and probably pivot a time or two between that.
Way to throw them all in there.
And make sure you have your IP covered. Another term that's often used is proof of concept. So you're looking at evidence that a potential product or service can be successful. You don't want to just keep your head down and keep running in a business without validating that it can work. Now, when I hear proof of concept, very often is in franchises. And I'm not talking about buying one. It's about developing one. Typically, someone will say a restaurant, to use a common example, will open up the first one and prove that it works. Open up a second one, proof of concept that it works, you can replicate it. Maybe a third one. You're developing your proof of concept before you start acquiring people to purchase into the franchise to set up their own location.
That's a cool way of looking at it, honestly. Yeah, I don't know that I've ever heard it used in the franchise model, but that works really well.
Yeah, proof of concept, you don't want to be just moving forward blind. You always want to be proving the concept. And it's not just at the beginning. Well, ideally at the beginning is very important, but I think it's important to keep having a proof of concept as you're moving forward, because there's always change within your business, no matter what you're in.
That's for sure. If you're growing, then there's going to be changes happening.
Another term that we hear very often is co-founder. It's an individual who, in partnership with one or more individuals, plays a significant role in creation of early operations of a business. Those people are co-founders.
The original founding team. Recently, I feel like the term co-founder is getting widened to include anyone that's really involved in the business in the first few years worth of operation. That title became very, very trendy and sought after. It sort of lost some of the pungent meaning of someone that was there from idea creation to success, but it still implies the same thing.
I think that's a stretch when you're looking at making all-inclusive. A term that we weren't planning on covering that I hear with that is title creep, especially early on. Someone becomes the vice president of marketing because that's a title. But then as you grow and you need to hire a real vice president of marketing, what do you do with that title? They become the senior vice president of marketing, and it becomes ridiculous. So that sounds a little bit of title creep with expanding co-founder to be everyone.
This is a controversial opinion, but I'm a big fan of just wonky titles in the beginning. Just assigning a random title that doesn't have any meaning. It can be sometimes frustrating because you don't know exactly who you're talking to, but it does prevent the problems that happen during growth, which can be extremely disruptive to the organization if you're changing everybody's structured title every month.
I was involved many years ago with a company that was doing lip synchronization. And their titles were the CEO was the head mouth, salespeople were the loud mouths, the engineers were the smart mouths, and that was to avoid specifically title creep.
Yep. It works well. Some people are very frustrated. I will put that out there, but it does work well in organizations.
Another term that's very often used again is accelerator. That's a program that offers business development support, mentorship, and funding opportunities for startups to speed up their growth, hence the term acceleration.
And there are a few very famous accelerators now that are popping up in most major metropolitan areas.
We've done an episode about that. We're surmising there's going to be more virtual accelerators as people are looking down the road. But accelerators have tremendous momentum, very popular today.
They are very popular today, that's for sure. I would say a lot of them are extremely good at what they do.
Another term that's very close to it, but there is a distinction, is incubator. And you think of incubating an egg. An incubator is an organization designed to increase the growth and success of an entrepreneurial company. Very often it's at the early stages in the developing those. And they tend to be longer periods of time people are involved with an incubator than an accelerator.
And it seems to be a long-term affiliation between two companies, so the incubator company and whatever startup they're helping. Whereas an accelerator program is just that. It's a 6-week, 12-week, 15-week, I've even seen, program that you go through that has defined steps that you accomplish throughout that. It's like going to an intensive school. Whereas an incubator, a lot of times, is an organization you become affiliated with, and they customize a plan to you and have their own roadmap instead of forcing you through this process.
The next and last term that I wanted to cover was a term that I heard when I first was involved with the MIT Global Startup Workshop when I was on their board of advisors, and they seemed to use it in every other sentence, was the ecosystem. An ecosystem, it's a network of interconnected businesses, services, or organizations that operate within a particular market or industry. And very often they can be geographic or they can be broader, as I said, from industry or a specific market perspective. But there is some connectivity, and that's the ecosystem within that genre, if you will.
People that aren't necessarily competing, but supporting each other.
It depends where I am that I hear the concept. If I'm in the technology world, I hear ecosystem more than in non-technology.
Right. And I think that's oftentimes because you can have that support without competition a lot of times in technology because you're pushing something forwards, but you're not necessarily targeting the same customers or clients.
And this is a great example of understanding the verbiage, because the first time I heard it, as I said, I was at a MIT conference. I think I was in London someplace, and everyone kept saying ecosystem, and I'm thinking of bugs. I didn't know what the hell they were talking about.
That is very funny, isn't it? These terms are awesome because so many of these are common knowledge to you and I. But as you read through them, right, the average person has probably heard the word ecosystem in affiliation with the animal kingdom a lot more than they have business, whereas my mind doesn't even go there anymore.
Exactly. And I'll never forget when they first kept hearing it, I'm thinking, why do they keep talking about insects?
That is too funny.
On that note, are there any final thoughts that you have about just understanding terminology? And we can reference back to the finance terms, marketing terms, and general terms.
It's a great way of getting insider knowledge. Every industry has these specific terms that make you an insider. Hopefully these 3 podcasts have been a fast track to at least understanding the conversations around you. And if not understanding, then hopefully even participating in those.
And as I have done with the previous 2 episodes, with this third part, I will, in the description, put the terms and the definitions of the 12 we covered. And I will also put in a few bonus points until I reach capacity of my description.
Fantastic. So we'll get a few bonus terms in there. I like it.
Sounds like a game plan. Well, let's get entrepreneurial.
Let's get entrepreneurial.
As we wrap up another episode of the Let's Get Entrepreneurial podcast, we extend our gratitude for your presence and attention. Your dedication to the entrepreneurial spirit fuels our passion for creating this podcast. Check out profspirit.com to discover resources and courses designed specifically for innovators like you. Stay on the cutting edge by following us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and other platforms as it is released. Until then, keep the entrepreneurial flame burning.